My name is Dennis Speed, and on behalf of the Schiller Institute, I want to welcome you to today's conference. This is part of a series of conferences that the Schiller Institute has been sponsoring for now several years on the dialogue of cultures and civilization, but this has a very specific significance, this one. America and the new American presidency can and should commit itself to a new economic outlook on behalf of all humanity. Today's conference is devoted to exploring the possibilities of radically transforming the relationship between China and the United States for the better, but that is merely one aspect of our purpose. The World Land Bridge proposal, advocated by Helga Zepp-LaRouche and the Schiller Institute, first advocated over 20 years ago and now refined and updated, is not a proposal for mere infrastructure development, but for a whole new economic platform and a new outlook on humanity. The prospect for a joint space mission to the moon, combining India, China, Russia, Japan, the United States, and other countries. The joint cooperative crash development of advanced nuclear power systems and of thermonuclear fusion power generation. Joint collaboration to end starvation, drought, and disease in Africa. By building the largest water, rail, and power projects in history, this is the human economy that we can now create. To tell you how this future can be attained and how that new economic platform can create a new human culture that will allow humanity to achieve adulthood and rise above the infantile diseases of war and conflict, it is my pleasure to introduce our first speaker, the founder and head of the Schiller Institute, Helga Zepp-LaRouche.
Well, ladies and gentlemen, I'm very happy to be able to address you, even if it's only electronically, but I'm happy to be with you, because this is very much a defining moment in history where the chances to build a completely new paradigm in the world is within reach and could be a reality in a very short period of time. Now, that may be difficult to believe if you look at the world as it is right now, which is clearly in the biggest uproar I have experienced maybe in my lifetime. The Trump election, the election of President Trump in the United States has caused violent reactions in the United States, in Europe, and I have not ever seen that an American president who just got democratically elected was met with such a fierce opposition. Therefore, I think it is important to situate this election in the broader context, because the election of President Trump was not the first such uproar. The really first one was last June. The Brexit vote of the British people, the decision to leave the EU, already caused a shock. Then you had the election of Trump, and then very shortly after that, you had a referendum in Italy deciding on the change of the constitution, where 60% of the Italians voted no against the policies of the EU. So you have to see Brexit, Trump vote, and the no in the referendum in one line. The foreign minister of Germany, Mr. Steinmeier, characterized the election of Trump as the end of the order of the 20th century. Now, obviously, that is what is going on, because you have indeed the common denominator between all of these revolutionary changes is the fact that the neoliberal world order, at least of the last 26 years after the collapse of the Soviet Union, indeed has ended, and it will never come back. Now, you have even a more extreme reaction of Mr. Tusk, who is the present president of the European Council, who just wrote a letter to the 27 remaining heads of state of the EU, where he said that the Trump administration represents the same threat to Europe like a newly assertive China, an aggressive Russia, and wars, terror, and anarchy in the Middle East and Africa. Now, even if you discount the fact that Mr. Tusk is a Polish and they have sometimes peculiar views these days, but to put Trump on the same level like ISIS, well, it was very clear from day one, the representatives of the collapsed unipolar world did not accept Trump as a president. Already in the forefield of the election, you had the hand of MI6 very clearly in the fake dossier of MI6 agent Christopher Steele, which basically tried to argue that Trump got the election only because Putin hacked into the emails of the Democratic Party, and that therefore Putin stole the election from Hillary Clinton, a ridiculous view which is still to the present day proclaimed by Hillary Clinton, by many of the Democrats. Now, the characterization of these demonstrations against Trump as a color revolution, which also, which was my first view on the matter, but also President Putin gave it the same name. Now, if you look at what happened with the color revolution, you had the same characteristics in the Orange Revolution in the Ukraine in 2004 and the so-called Rose Revolution in Georgia. This was the same kind of process in the Arab Spring, in the attempted but failed White Revolution against Russia, in the Yellow Revolution with the yellow umbrellas in Hong Kong, which did not go very far. And both the government of Russia and China characterized these efforts of color revolution as a complete form of war. Now, Putin basically called it a Maidan against Trump. And that is what it is. It's by the same people, the same political apparatus, and for the same motives. Now, to understand what is going on, in my view, one has to consider the entire history of the United States, because the British Empire at the time of the American Revolution never accepted that their most important colony, the America, would become independent. And they tried to reverse that first in a military way with the War of 1812. They tried the same thing with the Civil War, where the British Empire was allied with the Confederacy against Lincoln. And after that, they realized that it would not be possible to militarily reverse the independence of the United States. So they changed tactics, and they, from that point on, said, okay, if we can convince the American establishment to rule the world as an empire based on the British model, then we have it. And they succeeded to a very large extent to accomplish that. This was the basis of American policy since Teddy Roosevelt, with very short interruptions of Franklin D. Roosevelt and to a certain extent John F. Kennedy. Now, with the collapse of the Soviet Union, the neocons saw their moment, and the British, to establish this principle of an unipolar world, where basically they would eliminate every government which would not submit to this unipolar world through color revolution, through regime change, through wars based on lies, as it was in the case of Iraq, before Afghanistan, Libya, and they tried the same thing in Syria. Now, if you take the word or the concept globalization as just being another word for this Anglo-American empire, a system where the profit of the few is what counts, a system where the rich became unbelievably rich, where the poor became poorer, the middle class was vanishing. Well, this left a lot of people who felt left out, the so-called deplorables, which Hillary Clinton called them. So people had this tremendous sense of injustice caused by the EU, and that was the reason for the Brexit, not just the refugees, but the general feeling of that the EU bureaucracy is not representing the interest of the people. This was the case clearly with the rejection of Hillary Clinton, where the American population, or at least a large part of them, felt that they had no future, that in the Rust Belt, people would, have a shortening life expectancy. I mean, this is the clearest characteristic if a country is collapsing, when the life expectancy is going down. Now, this is the reason for all of these developments and also many strategic realignments in the world, which I have now not the time to go into, but it was what caused Trump's election victory. Now, Mr. Trump is in office for 2 weeks, and it is very clear that he is implementing all of his election promises. Now, some are good and hopeful, others are clearly more problematic. Take his America First. Well, my comment on the first day he said that, I said, okay, it's fine, America first, but what about all the other countries? They need to be first too. We need a new paradigm, a completely new set of relations among nations, where we don't have one country being the first, but where the new paradigm defines the common aims of all of mankind. Now, the globalization was at the expense of the American working population, clearly, because globalization meant outsourcing of industry. The United States has very little industry left, only in the military industrial sector and aerospace, and a couple of other areas. But a lot of the productive middle-level industries are not there anymore. They went to cheap labor markets. So it is correct when Trump says he wants to bring back the production to the United States, especially because you have tremendous problems. You have a collapsing infrastructure, you have a huge drug epidemic, you have violence, you have a rising suicide rate since 16 years. So he was correct to cancel TPP and NAFTA, because these were parts of the trade agreements of the system of globalization, which just went under. But what about the effect this has on the other nations? Building a wall with Mexico? Well, I mean, under the system of globalization, the food self-sufficiency of Mexico, which was 80% in the time of President Lopez Portillo, went down to approximately only 50%. So how do you compensate for that? Also, General Kelly, who has now a new post in the Trump administration, was absolutely correct when he said, not the Mexicans are the problem, but it is the fact that all of Central America has fallen under the control of the drug mafia. People are running away because they're afraid of their life, kidnapping, drug addiction, murder. So therefore, the question is not the Mexicans, it is really the drug traffic. Now, the ban on immigrants for 90 days, and 7 Muslim countries cannot come to the United States for that period. There was a huge outcry in Europe, but what a hypocrisy. European politicians felt that they had to lecture Trump on human rights, on all of these things. What a double standard. The EU is since a very long time trying to prevent all refugees from coming to Europe. Alone in 2016, more than 5,000 people drowned in the Mediterranean officially, and that does not count the many uncounted. They are trying to keep people away from coming through Greece and the Balkan routes, which is now blocked by NATO barbed wire. The head of the CSU in Bavaria, Mr. Seehofer, said that there should be a preference for people coming from Christian Occidental areas. Now that is just another formulation for what Trump is saying when he wants to keep the Muslim population out. Now, the EU has no problem in leaving the Greek people alone with terrible refugee camps of 100,000 people with, really not much care. They don't care about the refugee camps in the Balkans, where people without heating are trying to survive the winter and they don't have enough food. After the very dubious deal with Turkey, the EU just concluded a summit in Malta where they decided to make a deal with Libya, which does not even have a clearly defined government, where competing militias are fighting it out. And now the EU is training the Libyan Coast Guard. And even the first channel, German TV program called Monitor, said this is a deal with human traffickers and torturers, competing militias who are, absolute criminal. And with these people, the EU is trying to solve the refugee problem. So the EU in this respect is not one iota better than the idea of a wall with Mexico. Now, Trump also promised to implement Glass-Steagall, the banking separation law of Franklin D. Roosevelt. And around that, there is a huge fight in the United States right now, where it is very clear the bosses of Wall Street are dead set against Glass-Steagall. They are moving like crazy to prevent it and keep control. The designated Secretary of the Treasury, Mr. Mnuchin, already in a hearing with Maria Cantwell in the Senate, said that he is against Glass-Steagall as it was, and he wants to have some modern variety, which basically, is exactly not what is required. So right now, we are in a huge battle. Marcy Kaptur announced a new Glass-Steagall bill in the American Congress. There was a press conference by congressmen and women, Walter Jones, Tim Ryan, and Tulsi Gabbard, all for Glass-Steagall. LaRouche PAC is in a major national mobilization. You have many other organizations trying to put Mr. Trump's feet to the fire on his election promise. But this is clearly the Achilles heel of the Trump administration, because you can have any moment another 2008 financial blowout of the system. Now, he has made yesterday a new executive order giving the task to his cabinet to have a review of all aspects of the financial system within the next 120 days. And today you had all the financial media jubilant saying Wall Street won, the bankers won. Well, it is not yet decided. Now, on the positive side, Mr. Trump has started to improve relations with Russia. There are very positive signals, and that is one of the reasons why the representatives of the unipolar geopolitical faction are so absolutely upset, because they want to have regime change in Russia and not the US-Russian relation. They're even pronouncing Mrs. Merkel now to be the leader of the free world, which is a sort of a joke. Anyway, the first telephone discussion between Trump and Putin, both sides characterized as being very important. And this is really a very important precondition, because if Trump would not have been elected and we would have a Hillary Clinton president, we were on a short road to World War III. So therefore, this is a positive first step. Now, what about US-Chinese relations? Well, that's a little bit more problematic, because Mr. Trump made his first phone call not to Xi Jinping, but to the president of Taiwan, signaling that he may question the one China policy, which obviously the Chinese government was not very happy about. On the more positive side, the ambassador to China nominee, Terry Branstad, is a known friend of President Xi Jinping, and he just attended the Chinese New Year on the 1st of February, a concert of traditional Chinese music in Muscatine in Iowa, where he spoke of the long cordial relationship between Iowa and China, where he and Xi Jinping and Mr. Brandstedt met for the first time in the 80s, and where a friendship agreement, a sister state relationship was established between Iowa and Hebei province. Mr. Brandstedt gave then an interview to Xinhua where he said that if he is ambassador of the United States in China, he will work for a win-win policy between the United States and China. And that if the largest developed country and the largest developing country work together, it will not be only beneficial for the two of them, but for the whole world. And that is obviously the truth. Now, where is the potential to make that relationship the crucial change in world history? Mr. Trump promised in the election campaign that he would invest $1 trillion in the infrastructure in the United States in the next 10 years. He already met the CEO of Alibaba, Jack Ma, and they decided, or Mr. Ma offered to create a platform for e-commerce of another $1 trillion investment for Chinese investors to invest in the United States and American exporters to export to China. The Deputy Foreign Minister, Madame Fu Ying, recently spoke in New York, where she said the infrastructure cooperation between the United States and China can become a bridge leading to the collaboration in the new Silk Road. Now, the Schiller Institute, who developed this idea of the Eurasian land bridge, we called it the new Silk Road in '91, was the answer to the collapse of the Soviet Union, and we proposed the integration of Eurasia through infrastructure development corridors. And we kept working on this program for 25, by now 26 years, with many, many conferences around the world. And we kept enlarging this program, not only a Eurasian land bridge, but to integrate Africa, Latin America, all of Asia into one world land bridge. And in 2014, very much encouraged by President Xi Jinping's New Silk Road, we published this report and we called it The New Silk Road Becomes the World Land Bridge. Now, in 2015, we elaborated a chapter of that World Land Bridge report, and we called it The US Must Join the New Silk Road. And we had several conferences about that in New York, in Washington, in San Francisco, in Seattle, and we tried to convince the American industrialists, trade unions, and people in general that it would be in the absolute self-interest of the United States to work with China on this world land bridge idea. It is very clear that the United States urgently needs a new Silk Road. If you travel over the American highways, if you are unhappy, unlucky, you may end up disappearing in a pothole. If you look at the amount of miles of fast trains in the United States, you can find it. China, on the other side, they already by the end of last year had 20,000 kilometers of fast train. By the year 2020, they want to have 50,000 kilometers fast train connecting every major city in China through a fast train system. And I can assure you, from having had the fortune to travel with these trains, that they are really fantastic. They are fast, quiet. They don't take you around like European trains. And it is really, China is the world leader right now concerning such fast train systems. They have a new project where they want to connect the greater region of Beijing together with Tianjin and smaller cities to one very large region, where, however, the people living in so-called commuter cities can take a fast train like elsewhere, a bus, and be in 20 minutes at their workplace. So that kind of a system would be needed for the United States as well. you need to have a new infrastructure, fast train system connecting the north and the south, the east and the west. And why not build 50,000 miles of fast train in the United States? Then you could combine that with other large infrastructure projects, like solving the water crisis of Southwest America, Navapa, the creation of new water from ionization of the atmosphere, creating new water and weather patterns, build a couple of new cities, new science cities for international cooperation, joint research in fusion power, space cooperation, and just have a completely different approach to the idea of collaboration among nations. Now, this is where the cooperation with China and other nations comes in. China already offered cooperation in infrastructure investment in the United States. The United States could join immediately the Asian Infrastructure Investment Bank, the AIIB. And if the present motion to implement not only Glass-Steagall, but to implement the 4 laws of LaRouche, which is Glass-Steagall, a national bank, which creates credit lines for these investments, create an international credit system for joint ventures around the world, and have a crash program for fusion power and space cooperation, then the United States, China, and other nations could immediately start transforming the world. Now, it is quite interesting. For the last 3 years, or 3.5 years, since Xi Jinping put the new Silk Road on the international agenda, most Western think tanks were completely ridiculous. They basically said the new Silk Road is just another effort of Chinese imperialism. They have ulterior motives, and just one report like that after the other. But now there is a change. There is a realization, at least among some of these think tanks, that what is already happening is the biggest infrastructure project in history, that already what is happening now is 12 times as big as the Marshall Plan in today buying power of dollars, that it involves already 4.4 billion people, that more than 70 countries are already cooperating. It is expanding very quickly. It involves already trillions of dollars of investments. And for example, between Chinese cities and Europe, there are already 8 regular train routes where container trains are arriving every week. So while the EU is still offish, the German government is still offish, nevertheless, there are some changes. For example, the Federal Academy for Security Policy in Germany, their vice president, Mr. Thomas Wrisnik, just put out a paper where he talked about the, quote, geostrategic significance of the Chinese New Silk Road Initiative. Now, in his paper, he still reflects a little bit the old view, being a little bit, suspicious here and there. But after all ifs and buts, he recognizes the fact that the Belt and Road Initiative has a tremendously stabilizing effect everywhere where it proceeds. So he basically proposes at the end of the paper that Europe should be open to the Chinese offer to cooperate. And then he says that despite Trump's previous anti-China statements, it cannot be excluded that the United States jumps at this initiative, joins the AIIB, and given the fact that the United States has leadership in digitalization and Chinese have expertise in other areas, these could be complementary and work together to each other's benefit. And that is exactly the point. Now, not only would that benefit the United States, for example, China has for sure a better fast train technology than the United States at this point. China could help the reconstruction of the world, of the American economy. But there could be also joint US, Chinese, Russian, Indian, European cooperation, for example, in Southwest Asia. Now that through the Russian military intervention in Syria and the Astana peace talks, there is for the first time the possibility of peace in the Middle East, but that requires to build up the economies of Afghanistan, Iraq, Syria, Yemen, Northern Africa, because that will be the only way how you can dry out the atmosphere for recruitment of terrorism. Now, Mr. LaRouche already in 1975 proposed a development plan for the Middle East he called the Oasis Plan, which was the idea that you have to create new water sources through different technological means in order to have peace. In 2012, the Schiller Institute proposed the extension of the new Silk Road into the Middle East to develop Southwest Asia as a basis for peace. Now, our World Landbridge report has been translated into Arabic already, and a couple of months ago, it was presented by the transport minister of Egypt in a big press conference in Cairo, together with Mr. Hussein Askari, and Egypt declared that what is in this World Landbridge report is the Egyptian program for the Middle East. So we are not starting with zero, but there is already tremendous motion in this direction. Now, when President Xi Jinping was in Iran last year, he proposed the extension of the Silk Road, not only to Iran, but to Iraq, to Syria, and obviously from there to Africa and to Europe. Now, the development of Africa is already being constructed with Chinese investments in many countries. Just a couple of days ago, the official opening of the rail line between Djibouti and Addis Ababa occurred. And this is a very important intervention which will transform many, many countries in Africa. China also has now started to make a feasibility study for the Lake Chad initiative, which would bring water from the Congo River to refill Lake Chad, and that would transform the economic prosperity for 12 nations in this region. So there is already tremendous activity going on. Now, instead of training a very suspicious and dubious Libyan coast guard to keep the refugees back in Africa, would it not make more sense if the European nations would join with China and others like Japan and India, who already are involved in Africa, to develop the African continent? Now, the formulation by President Xi Jinping that what we have to build is a community for the future of mankind based on a win-win cooperation is exactly how to look at this. This is not a zero-sum game where one nation wins and the other one loses, but it is a new perspective where all countries of this planet can work together in the benefit of each. It is exactly the idea what Friedrich Schiller developed in the context of the American Revolution in his play Don Carlos, where in the famous scene between Marquis of Posa talking with King Philip II, and where he said that Spain should not be great because of the suppression of the Flanders, but should allow all the provinces to prosper exactly like Spain. And Posa said to Philip, "Be a king of a million kings." And this was a very clear refutation against the idea of equality of the French Revolution, where equality basically meant with the Jacobins that you reach equality through the means of the guillotine, because then everybody is beheaded and everybody is equal. And Schiller contrasted that with the noble idea of the American Revolution, that everybody in the whole country should prosper, and the common good should be what unites all. Now, this is what we have to accomplish today. We need a new paradigm, and that new paradigm must be as different from the present paradigm of globalization as modern times was different from the Middle Ages in Europe. The Middle Ages in Europe were terrible. They were a dark age. They were characterized by scholasticism, by superstition, by witch belief. And modern times made it possible to have natural science, to have classical culture. And the new paradigm, which replaces globalization, must exactly leave the wrong axioms behind. And by wrong axioms, I mean geopolitics, the neoliberal idea of wealth creation, that it is the control of trade, free trade, which generates wealth, and it must be replaced by the idea that the only source of wealth is the creativity of the human being. And therefore, the common aims of mankind must focus on that what is unique about the human species is that we are the only creative species, and we can discover universal laws deeper and deeper, and we call that scientific progress. And when we turn that scientific progress into technologies, it increases the productivity of the economic process, and that in turn leads to a higher living standard, a longer life expectancy, and prosperity for everybody. So when we do this now, we can reach the adulthood of mankind. Wars will be a question of the past. We will no longer use violence to resolve conflicts, but we will concentrate on the common aims of mankind, of space exploration, of reaching energy and raw material security through mastering of fusion technology and similar things. Now, if we are guided by such a beautiful vision of the future, we indeed will be able to make a new set of relations among nations. And I think that if we can convince the United States with the Trump administration to cooperate with China on the new Silk Road, I am safe on the prediction that Mr. Trump will not be only a great American president, but if he can mobilize his country to join hands with China right now, he will go into history as one of the towering giants of all of universal history.
Thank you, Helga. I just want to check something. I understand we may have a couple of questions for Helga because of scheduling issues for some people. Is that the case, Elliot? Okay, let's take 2 questions because I don't want to go too far off schedule, but if there are a couple questions, is there someone who have one? Okay, good.
Is this, you can hear me? Okay, hi. As you know, I'm Diane Sayre from the LaRouche PAC Policy Committee and one of the directors of the Schiller Institute Chorus, and you partly began to answer my question, but I suspect it affects many Americans here who are being dismayed by watching our friends who we knew to be intelligent, compassionate people getting completely swept away into the hysteria around being generated by the media against Trump. And while they may have legitimate things they disagree with, then you say, but you know, where were you when Obama killed 200 people in Somalia in a drone attack? Where were you when Hillary Clinton was gloating over the murder of Gaddafi? Where were you when all these people drowned in the Mediterranean, which you referenced? And so I was thinking about what is the weakness where you would have people consider themselves to be so self-righteous in their hysterical ranting about this and oblivious to what they had just been tolerating recently. And I began to get an answer on the front pages of the newspapers. One today at the front page of the travel section of the Bergen Record, they are advertising a new form of cruise. It's called clothes optional. And I read a little bit of this article, and it's basically like orgies. I mean, it's an advertisement for going on a cruise where everyone is naked. And the kind of things they said were available on this ship, I'm not going to repeat in case children ever watch this. And I thought, oh my gosh, this is really this is hideous. And I sort of imagined something from the Roman Empire and the ship just sinking out of its own hysteria and insanity. The other thing was a front page article in the New York Times yesterday about a growing trend of pregnant women who are smoking pot because it alleviates their morning sickness. And the fact that there are study upon study showing that this creates growth problems and brain damage and so on, here it's being promoted on the front of the New York Times as a legitimate way to get through your pregnancy and, you know, to hell with your children. So it struck me very hard that one big part of the problem of how people who nominally appear to be rational can be so easily swept into this insanity is because of the culture of this country. And I think you created the Schiller Institute to address that directly. So I really wanted to get your thoughts.
Well, I think I want to refer to a press conference Mr. Lavrov, the Russian foreign minister, recently gave, where he blasted the defense of so-called Western values by saying that these values, which are supposedly the basis of Western democracy and human rights and so forth, are really not the values which were transmitted from generation to generation, but they have become completely degenerate. Sexual permissiveness, everything goes, and it is exactly those Western values Russia opposes. And China is also opposing, because Xi Jinping is promoting a renaissance of classical Confucian values and ideas and classical culture. And I think that that is a very important component, because, as you say, if people are in this totally degenerated culture where really everything goes, there is no more limit to what is allowed in terms of violence, in terms of sex, it turns people into something worse than beasts. Because I have never seen a tiger or a donkey or a dog, engaging in these kinds of activities you are describing. They may eat another animal when they are hungry, but then they stop. They don't go into perverse sexual pleasures. So it's worse than bestial. And I think we need to have a complete rejection of that, recognize that this is not in cohesion with the dignity of the human mind. And that, that is why we need not only a new Silk Road perspective of cooperation among the nations of the world, but we need a dialogue of cultures on the highest level, where European classical culture, which happens to be also American culture, Chinese, Indian, and other cultures, Italian, Spanish, should all revive the high phases of their culture and dialogue on that basis. And I think that that is an absolutely important part, because if you don't change the culture and the thinking and the morality of the people, all of this will not work. So I think it is very clear that the Schiller conception, and that is why we call it the Schiller Institute, the aesthetical education of man is what has to occur together with this economic reform. And in the sense of Schiller, we can ask, how comes that we are still barbarians? If Schiller would be alive today, he would say, you have become worse in the last 200 years. So let's reverse that.
Okay. And we have one other question we'll take now. And just so people know, there will be a question and answer period later for other questions. So.
Hello, everyone. Nice to meet you, Mrs. Helga, again. And we are very thankful for your invitation to be here and to share very important thoughts. Please meet a member of our Russian delegation, Mr. Bykov Vyacheslav, who is PhD in soil fertility science, and FAO representative. Please.
Уважаемые дамы и господа, большое спасибо, что предоставили возможность выступить на этом собрании.
Dear ladies and gentlemen, thank you very much for giving me this opportunity to share my ideas with you here.
Я хочу занять ваше внимание предложение, которое может послужить объединяющей основой для хорошего налаживания отношений между Россией и Америкой и другими странами. Это программа, которая разработана нами.
I would like to propose you a special program which could serve the development of American-Russian relations for the better, and not only American-Russian, but with the other countries as well.
Только общая цель может быть достигнута, когда мы будем объединены решением каких-то задач, которые важны для человечества.
The main goal of the whole mankind could be reached only if we unite ourselves for the sake of implementation of the goal, for the sake of the whole mankind.
Мы долго думали, что может быть объединяющим для нас.
We have been thinking for a long time, during a long time, what it could be. What idea could unite ourselves?
И мы поняли, что только решение проблем, которые стоят перед человечеством, могут сделать это фактически несколько стран. Это прежде всего Россия, которая обладает громадными запасами природных ресурсов, и другие страны, в том числе Америка, которая обладает технологической мощностью.
And we have come to the conclusion that for the implementation of the main important goals for the mankind, it could be implemented only by some countries. From one side, Russia owes various resources. From the other side, America owes technologies, technical resources, and other countries.
Мы разработали и опробировали программу, которая решит множество задач. Это программа восстановления плодородия на деградированных территориях, в том числе пустынях и территориях, которые загрязнены громадными, различными загрязнениями.
And we have worked out a special program which can serve restoration of the land, which were the restoration of the land and the desertification. It means fighting desert, of making the fertility, bringing fertility to the deserts.
Программа позволит создать миллионы рабочих мест.
This program will give the opportunity to create millions of labor places.
Программа позволит создать условия для производства продовольствия в странах, которые не имеют плодородной почвы.
Then this program will give the opportunity to create conditions for production of different products, different kinds of foods in the countries where they have no fertile soils.
Программа позволит снизить миграционные потоки.
This program also will give the opportunity to decrease migrants' flows.
И программа, которая позволит стать бескровным методом борьбы с терроризмом.
And this program also will give the opportunity to become so-called bloodless tool of fighting terrorism.
Когда мы создадим рабочие места, то каждый человек подумает, что ему взять, автомат в руки или стать за плуг. Мне кажется, выберут второй вариант.
When we create all those conditions, every person, in my opinion, will think, first of all, whether to take a gun or to take another tool to produce something for his life.
И мы можем мировому сообществу предложить новый экспортный товар. Это товар гектары, акры лесов, полей и плантаций, на которых можно выращивать продукцию в тех странах, где это невозможно в сегодняшнее время.
Thus, we can propose to the mankind, to all the countries, to produce different foodstuffs, vegetables, and grains in the countries where it is actually impossible.
Программа позволит направить мир на путь созидания, а не войны. Мне так кажется.
In my opinion, this program will push the world to the life of creativity, not to the destruance. Thank you.
Thank you.
I'm very happy to hear what you are saying, because this is exactly the philosophy which guides our efforts since more than 40 years. I would like to invite you to send us a more elaborated version of your program, and then we should, we have many means. We can talk about which countries should be interested. Obviously the United States should be the first place to get people interested in to invest in this program. But we are also talking to many Arab countries, we are talking to African countries, and I think that this is exactly what is one of the things which could give an inspiration to turn the deserts into green agricultural lands and woods and farms and gardens. I think that is exactly the kind of vision which inspires people and gives them back a hope for the future which they have lost. So I would like to invite you to give us your papers, get in contact with us concretely, and then we can determine what is the most fruitful cooperation between us.
Thank you, Helga. So now we're going to return to our next speaker. How can great nations of vastly different cultural backgrounds find common aims by means of which those differences and distinctions are not only overcome, but in some cases turned into new capabilities which benefit the other nation? It is possible for one nation, even for America, to learn from another nation and to both thereby improve themselves. The New Silk Road is as much a proposal for cultural growth and progress as for economic growth and progress. Just as one example of that dialogue, this is our report. I think everybody is familiar with it in English. This is our report, as Helga reported to you, in Arabic. And this is our report in Chinese. This report, the Belt and Road monograph, was edited and partially written by our next speaker. It's now being revised. I know some people were asking us yesterday and today for copies of it, and those that want them should just see us at the table and we can order them. There's a new one coming out and it will be made available. Dr. Patrick Ho wrote the preface to this report, which is entitled One Belt, One Road, a new model of inclusive economic growth and sustainable development. His organization, the China Energy Fund Committee, has special consultative status at the United Nations. And he's here, as he's been here before, he was here in December to give you another talk in the hope that he will inspire us all to do a little work on behalf of getting the United States, as Helga has already urged, to join the policy and progress of the Belt Road Initiative. So, Dr. Ho.
Well, thank you, Dennis, and good morning, everybody. It's noon now, so still comes. I was here 2 months ago in December last year. I spoke on the One Belt, One Road and the most recent thinking about that. And afterwards, I received quite a few questions about not only about One Belt One Road, but some of the corollaries and the inference it's referring to. But all these questions points to one very basic issues. It is, what is the vision behind it? What's the value behind this? And what is it doing to humanity? What is it doing to the world? It is just a figment of the imaginations or a tick of inclinations of leaders, or it is something that's contrived out of the blue. What is this? What's the foundation of it? So today, upon the second invitation from Helga and also from Dennis and from the Schiller Institute, I would like to take maybe half an hour or so to discuss with you this basic questions about Chinese values and how does it measure up with the values of the rest of the world, especially with the Western values, and how do we look at it in the context of the history of developments, especially in recent decades and centuries. So we're here today to discuss how the Chinese values, especially Oriental values, have influenced the rest of the world. And what we learn from history while also keeping the future in mind. I can't really see this. Can I move this forward a little bit?
That's enjoying that.
Yeah, sure.
Yeah, you good? You good?
Yeah, fine. Okay. And this is the agenda that I will try to cover today. And to begin with, the presentation of the thesis of what is China? What is it that has held so many people together for millennia? What is Chineseness? What gives the Chinese a sense what it is to be Chinese? Well, it is. Okay, good. Now, three things you need to remember about China. China is land. It's a big piece of land. China is people, a lot of people. Then China is civilizations, a long legacy of civilization. That makes China, I think. That's my definition of it. Okay. Then China is the third largest country with the longest land border, totaling 22,000 kilometers, which is shared with 14 other nations, which is a stark contrast to America. How many neighbors does America has? America has Canada in the north, a weak nation. It has Mexico in the south, a weak nation. It has to the east, fish. To the north, to the west, fish. But China has 14 very fierce neighbors that's trying to steal its borders. Okay, that's why Chinese has always regarded the border issues with, and always trying to uphold its sovereignty with border issues with fierceness, steadfastness, and determination. And that's what we're seeing in the South China Sea today. Well, China also holds 22% of the world population, which it feeds with 8% of the world's arable land. So we have heard from the Russian friends, then what they're doing for land will be very, very applicable for China. China has 22% of the world population. It feeds with 8% of its arable land. So where's the rest of the food come from? And we have to make do with what lands we have, unless we got more land, or we turn more deserts or unarable land, turn it into arable land. And also, on top of that, the agricultural production has to be of very high efficiency. So we have to have more crops per year, and we have to have more harvesting per crops. So land is food and its economic development. China, the most populated country on earth, with 54 races, each with a varying set of customs, habits, and living conditions, is extremely diverse, very pluralistic, and very much decentralized. They are held together by a common written language and a set of cultural core values derived from their long legacy of civilization. And China is the only one of the ancient civilizations that has been uninterrupted for the last 5,000 years. China is indeed, in so many ways, not like the West. It is not even primarily a nation state when its people are defined by political identity, but it is a civilization state, which is people are defined by a cultural identity. Now, this helps to explain why the Chinese place so much and such a huge emphasis on unity and stability. Their reference for a state and their distinctive notion of family, social relationships such as guanxi, meaning personal relationship, and embrace of ideas such as harmony with diversity. And unlike Europe, China never sought to acquire overseas colonies, but established a tribute system in East Asia through cultural attraction and coercion, never by conquest or by force. The Chinese state bears a fundamentally different relationship to society compared with any Western state. Yeah, this doesn't really work that well. The state of the government is seen as an intimate, as a member of the family, a necessary good rather than, as in the Western discourse, a problem, a evil, a threat, or even the enemy of the people. For the Chinese, the state is the embodiment of a civilization, and as such, its legitimacy comes from the cultural legacy and core values that it upholds and protects. And in many ways, we can already see how the return of China to prominence has not only been good for China, but for the world. By lifting hundreds of millions of people out of poverty, China has contributed to global prosperity. But China's most significant contribution to the world will be intangible ones: its cultural wisdom, its metaphysics, and its traditional values, a resource unique to China, rare germs formed by heat and pressure over immense periods of time and tribulations. Few, if any, countries can claim the cultural longevity of China. China's culture is vast and its traditions run deep. The reemergence of Chinese culture will therefore help bring balance to global culture. The propagation and exchange of Chinese culture will lead to a wiser, more thoughtful, and more creative global culture. As it has in the past, exchange will spur innovation, creativity, and cause a flourishing in science, art, and humanities. And it will lead to a second global renaissance of humanity. History, the overall, we will have 3 knocks. We knock on the doors and say, who's there, right? So we can look at the history for examples of change and interactions between China and the world. 3 times, the West has knocked on China's doors. And 3 times, China has returned the knocking on the doors of the West. China was among the first countries to undertake major initiatives for long-distance trade and exchange outside of its territories. 2,000 years ago, just about the time of Christ, during the Han Dynasty, Zhang Qian from Xi'an established the first Silk Road. This was China's first knock on the Western door, extending itself with friendship to territories outside its boundaries. And it was during that period that ancient Rome came to know of China, which it called Ceres. The Chinese similarly learned of a parallel empire in the West, which they named Daqin. Among other things, the Roman upper classes particularly prized Chinese silk, with demand so high that the government attempted many times, unsuccessfully though, to limit its import. The phenomenon was important enough for Pliny the Elder to discuss silk and its origins in China in his Natural History. The Chinese envoy Gang Yin, on the other hand, wrote about what he learned of Rome during his travels, among other things discussing the republican form of government that Romans once held. Although limited by the enormous distances, there was already an exchange of ideas between the East and the West. And among these long-distance travelers, Marco Polo in the Yuan dynasty was the best known of them all. Oh, thank you very much. So China's second knock came in the 15th century, just about 500 or 600 years ago, in the Ming Dynasty, when Zheng He's fleet roamed the seas, bringing peace and trade to distant lands. Zheng He, he was a general and also a eunuch of a Muslim faith coming from Yunnan. Zheng He's 7 voyages, which reached Eastern Africa, greatly increased China's knowledge of the outside world. Many were the people who found Zheng He's fleet breathtaking and who subsequently sought to become tributaries of China. In an early example of panda diplomacy, these nations gave Zheng He a variety of unique animals, ostriches, giraffes, and zebras, among others. The giraffes in particular brought delight to the Ming court. Whereas Julius Caesar said, "I came, I saw, and I conquered," the Chinese said, "I came, I saw, I made friends, and I went home." No battle was fought, no one was enslaved, and no colonies seized. These 2 occasions saw China reaching out to the world in peace and friendship, wanting to understand and be understood. We take distance for granted today and can only imagine the sense of wonder, a spirit of friendship, and feelings of discovery that these knocks inspired both in China and the world. Then the West turned to knock on China's door, came during the Renaissance, around the time of the Ming and Qing dynasties. The West's advancements in seamanship and long-distance traveling, in particular, allowed it to stretch its influence around the world, seeking trade and colonies under the pretense of preaching Christianity. This was the first knock by the West. Western missionaries began to operate in China in the 15th century. Many of these missionaries did not come simply to preach Christianity. They recognized the accomplishments of Chinese society and sought to learn from the Chinese people. There was considerable exchange of knowledge during this period. The West shared its knowledge of mathematics, medicine, and astronomy, while China shared its philosophies, technologies, and political development. Matteo Ricci, Joaquim Bouvet, and Giuseppe Castiglione were among the many missionaries working in China during this period. Bouvet, a French Jesuit priest, most notably, brought the Yijing to the West, where it inspired many. The long-term consequences of the remarkable discoveries that took place in this period are something that I will discuss in more detail a few minutes later. The first knock of the West on China's door using Christianity and science began well, but ended abruptly when the West discovered that the Chinese rites and rituals were finding their ways into Christian practices, threatening the doctrines of the Roman Catholic Church. The door of China was open for just a while and then was carelessly slammed shut. The second knock by the West on China's door followed the Industrial Revolution. During this period, Western countries, hoping to enrich themselves with natural resources through their military supremacy, forcibly expanded colonialism to the East. In 1840, Britain, prompted by its opium merchants, invaded China. This was the first Opium War. Despite China's vast economy and military forces, it lost the war and was forced to sign unequal treaties with the West. The Second Opium War and the Sino-Japanese War, which followed, which took place later in that century, brought even more disaster to China. The second knock by the West on China's door was accomplished with guns and warships. China's door was plied ajar brutally against will, followed by 100 years of humiliation and national disaster. The West's second knock was a difficult period for China, but it also awakened the nation. China realized it had to modernize and catch up with the West, and finally began strengthening its military, economy, and politics. The self-strengthening movement, the 100 Days Reform, Sun Yat-sen's overthrowing of the Qing dynasty, the May 4th movement, all of these were responses to the hard lesson learned during the West's second knock. The second knock initialized a cultural and political dialogue within China, which continued throughout the last century. For China, this process of modernization has been one of self-reflection, self-renewal, and self-fortification, during which traditional core values have been endowed with new meanings and applications. Ultimately, it was these traditional core values which provided the necessary cohesive spiritual force that bound the Chinese people together during this period of trial and tribulation. The West itself, despite its aggression, took many lessons from China during this period. Thomas Wade and Herbert Giles, for example, developed the first romanization system for Chinese language. The latter translated the Analects, the Tao Te Ching, and the Zhuangzi, and developed the first widely distributed Chinese English dictionary. The West's third knock on the door of China came in the 1970s using diplomacy. In 1972, US President Richard Nixon visited China, offering an olive branch to China and seeking to integrate the country into the global economic system. When Deng Xiaoping came to power, China began its journey of developing a socialist market economy with Chinese characteristics. With the following rapid economic advancement, China became a moderately well-off society. As was the case with the other knocks, considerable exchange occurred during this period. China was introduced to the Western concept of market economy and international trade. The multifaceted social contact that China experienced during this period was vitally important to its modernization. Now I would just to branch off a little bit and retrace the path of Yijing and Leibniz. Thousands of years ago, Chinese philosophy found a metaphysical and magical instrument called the Yijing, which probably is the oldest book in Chinese history and Chinese culture, which describes not only life and events in the changes of things, but also harbors the secretive and primeval laws of nature. Indeed, Chinese metaphysics is behind one of the driving forces of the present age, the computer and the internet. These technologies which have revolutionized human experience, can trace their origins to some of the most ancient Chinese wisdom, the Yijing. Computer relies on the binary number system to make their calculation. All the activities of the computer, all the information exchanged across the internet is ultimately reduced to two numbers, ones and zeros. The mathematics of the binary system were expounded by Gottfried Leibniz, a German philosopher and mathematician in the late 17th century. Although Leibniz had been working on the binary system for some time, a breakthrough inspiration for his work came from China when he was introduced to Yijing, in particular Shaoyongs, which existed and lived in the world some 500 years or 600 years before Leibniz, interpretations of Yijing and the Song dynasty more than 600 years before Leibniz's time. So Leibniz rediscovered what Chinese wisdom had done some 600 years later. Leibniz was in correspondence with Joachim Bouvet, a Jesuit priest, who, among other things, had taught the Emperor Kangxi the Western developments in mathematics. Bouvet had come across the Yijing and recognized the depth and insight of the work. Bouvet, who himself saw the Yijing as reaffirming his views on the universalities of spiritual knowledge, forwarded the work to Leibniz. Now, this is going to show you a series of slides, very complicated, but this shows you what the binary system and the Yijings have all come together, okay? Leibniz immediately saw the parallel between his work on the binary system and the Shaoyong's version of Yijing interpretation from the Song dynasty. Leibniz recognized that Yijing's yin and yang were equivalent to the binary system. There's yin and yang. Okay, binary system. Well, to really, got my hobby horse. Okay, this is Yijing. This is a Bagua, of course. Now this is one of what we call is a Yao. This is one Yao. Yao is just an entity. So this is Yang. Yang is a solid line. This is what represents one. With yin is a broken line, yao, with zero. When the two come together, we call it to have a gestalt with two yao together. Okay, with two yin is 0 and 0. If you add 1 to this, it is 1 and 0, 0, 1. But if you add another 1 to this, you do look at 2, but you have 1 bounce onto the yin, become yang, and then this becomes yin, then this 10. If you add another 1 to this, and this becomes 2 yang. So this is the binary system progression. If you add another 1 to this, instead of having 2 lines, you have 3 ones, then you're beginning with 0, 0, 0. You add 1 to this, you have 0, 0, 1. You have add 1 to this one, then you have this bounce by the first position to the second position. So you have 0, 1, 0. You add another 1 to this, you have 0, 1, 1. You add 1 to this, you bounce to this. This yin become yang, and this yin become yang. So you bounce 1 of this and it become 100. You add 1 to this and 101. Get 1 to this, you get bounce this one to this one. So you had leftover 1. So 1, 1, 0, and 1, so forth. You see, this is what is called binary progression. Everything from 1 to 9, from 1,000 to millions, is all represented by 1 and 0, but in different positions. Okay, so this is how computer works. This is geometry. This is calculus. And this is the basis and foundation of internet. This is Yijing, all right? And Yijing, with different combinations of yin and yang in different positions, it came together and it derived itself into 64 possibilities of combination. And with these 64 possibilities, it encompasses all the options of what's happening in the whole wide world. You can predict all possibilities and all situations and all options, all with these 64 what's called hexagrams with 6 lines, each line represented by either a solid line or a broken line, a yin and yang. And this is all, this computer, this is digitalizations, okay? So, furthermore, he saw that the Yijing used those 2 fundamental values to encompass deeper symbols, assembling the yin and yangs to form trigrams and hexagrams. The Yijing utilized binary calculus at least 600 years before Leibniz's treatise of that number system. And there's another renditions of the Yijing, of binary system. You can, well, if you have the time, you can go through them and you can see the progression. It's beautiful. Everything works out just very nicely. The 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, all the way from 1 to 64. And there's another way of realigning this, and this is all binary system and Yijing. And this is what Leibniz did not hesitate to acknowledge the insight gained from the Yijing, even mentioning the work in the full title of his treatise on the binary system. And this is what actually Leibniz wrote in his treatise. And that's exactly the same as the progression of the binary system is enumerated in Yijing before. The centuries that followed the publication of that treatise have been tremendous progress in science and technologies. This progress has often confirmed the prescience of Chinese metaphysics. Niels Bohr, a modern physicist and a nuclear physicist, atomic physicist, whose contribution to quantum physics paved the way for the development of the microprocessors, chose to use the yin-yang, or Taiji Tu, in his coat of arms. And it's still, this coat of arms is still being ingrained on the cornerstone of the Bohr's Institute in Poland. The exchange between China and Leibniz was the first step in the development of the computer, a technology that now is helping us bridge different nations and cultures. And it could be stated that the Chinese metaphysics of Yijing predicted and laid a foundation for the binary system and opened up a byte era, typified by computer and cyber technology, leading to a higher level of intelligence. Now, Yijing also bears some implications on human DNA, and this is the cutting edge. Now is on the edge of research of Chinese metaphysics and also on the binary system and how it implications on the DNA. During the last century, the strictly analogous relationship between the mathematical structure of this Chinese wisdom found in Yijing and the very recently deciphered mathematical structure of the DNA molecule was noted. Now, we all know that DNA is made up of 4 nucleotides-based molecules called A, which is the adenine, T for thymine, and C for cytosine, and G for guanine. These are 4 nucleotides, basic nucleotides made up of all the genes, okay? These letters are in a single long molecule, but apparently they are grouped in 3s as codons. And that means the possible combination along the DNA molecules are as such. Very complicated, but let me make a long story short. Our genes are made up of combinations of these nucleotides. Each nucleotide is dictated by the binary functions of whether it's positive and negative. And you can manipulate and juggle with that, and everything comes up to be perfect and fitting the equation very well. Okay, I won't go into details of it because it may take hours to do that. And it's just to show you that in modern science, okay, modern science, all proteins, the human body is made up of proteins. The proteins are made up of amino acids. The groups of amino acids are the building blocks of our body. Amino acids are made up of combinations of these nucleotides. Nucleotides are made up of combinations of 1 and 0. Okay, that it boils down to. All right. So there's the basic elements of the human makeups. Okay. Well, there's a 16 already starting with A, and another 16 starting with T. Is very, very complicated. I wouldn't go into this. But DNA is written in the words of 3 letters out of 4 possible letters. That makes 4 by 4 by 4, or 64 possible words in the entire dictionary of the DNA language, called codons, which contains all the genetic secrets of a cell. It was soon referred to a similar mathematical combination and permutation as found in the Yijing. Both DNA and Yijing were based upon the binary quaternary code that generates a system of 64 possibilities for the combinational properties of triplicities and diagrams. Both systems embody probabilistic principles which determinations of specific results or oracular response of amino acids. And both systems involve processes of transformation changes. In Yijing, the hexagram changes into other hexagram through the interchange of yin and yang lines, while point mutation occurs through changes in the nucleotide bases. A very precisely defined triplet of sequences is specific for the protein structure of a very precisely defined part of a living creature. These precisely formulated instructions in the DNA structure define the genetic makeup of the organisms. The sum total of these code words is similar to the blueprint for producing the whole living being with all its characteristics. Analogous relationships are gradually discovered to relate the metaphysical relationship with the genetic composition of living cells. Possibly, such direction of work may provide a scientific basis to explain how Yijing-based feng shui or Chinese astrology may affect people and offspring on a cellular level. Next, I will discuss about Daoism, which is another Chinese heritage, and sustainable development. Daoism by Lao Tzu, being the Bible of Daoism, is also a book of profound wisdom and great learning. Daoism, on composing only about 5,000 Chinese characters, 5,000 words, together with Yijing, provides the architectural framework for Chinese metaphysics and indigenous religion. Work has been underway to apply the wisdom of Daoism in addressing the modern day's problems and difficulties in life. In particular, the book may yield clues to a sustainable lifestyle, which is paramount in underpinning all initiatives leading to reaching the 17 targets of the post-2015 Sustainable Development Goal just rolled out by the United Nations last year. And I'm sure that you will be hearing more about this. For example, we know that although with the technology progress today, there's still 1.2 billion people in the world that still live in extreme poverty. Extreme poverty is defined by having less than $1 a day. Okay, whereas 850 million people are still chronically undernourished, while at the same time, at the other side of the globe, 1/3 of the food produced for human consumption, this is about 1.3 billion tons per year, is wasted. It's wasted. We all understand that 1.2 billion people in the world have no access to electricity, and 2.7 billion people of the world have no clean cooking facilities. Whereas on the other side of the world, with 5% of the world's population, we're talking about the United States of America, consumed 20% of the world's energy, drives 25% of the world's cars, and uses 40% of the world's gasoline. Is that sustainable, ladies and gentlemen? So the sustainable goal has to inspire responsibility in the affluent as well. What we really need is not to hand out fishes, but to teach people how to fish. We need to lead a sustainable lifestyle. What is a sustainable lifestyle? It's to use what we need, but not what we want. There are too many wants and so little needs. So we're calling upon the world for careful consumption, use resources efficiently, sparingly, responsibly, and smartly, and to warn the world against excess and extravagance. That's the spirit and the teaching of Daoism. You see how it could apply to the world? If we can do that, I think we'll see on the horizon a second Renaissance. We have seen how the ancient Chinese wisdom of Yijing, combined with the technological know-how of the Western sciences, can develop into game-changing breakthrough that deeply affect human life. Such an observation points out the importance of dialogues, exchanges, and metaphysical cross-fertilization between civilizations and of different cultural core values. Chinese culture is dominated by Confucianism. The Renaissance has brought humanism into the European society previously dominated by the church. But whereas Western humanisms centered on the self and emphasizes individualism and other specific values, Eastern humanism not only focuses on human relationship, which thereby prescribed the essence of a Chinese person, but the entire holistic makeup in which human is part and parcel of the overall arrangements. So this differentiation is not only between the East and the West. After the last elections in the United States, we can see that this differentiation is also happening in the United States. Maybe you can call the Western humanism is liberalism, and the Eastern humanism, the conservatism. Just watch. Chinese culture is dominated by Confucianism, which anchors its principles on an ancient religious foundation of Daoism, while establishing the social values and ideals for the traditional Chinese society. Confucian philosophy presupposes three biospheres of human interactions: heaven, earth, and humans. And man must find peace in all three. For the man-man biosphere, Confucius emphasized proper conduct in one's social relations, because it is in the company of others that man reaches his ultimate fulfillment. This code of behavior is called Li, or the social and ethical norms that guide people to do the appropriate things at the right time, manifesting respect and kindness. The most important of all virtues is benevolence, called Ren, which is love of fellow humans, a sense of compassion based on the dignity of human life and great self-respect. We cultivate Ren, or charity, or kindness, or love, by putting ourselves in the position of others and treating them as you wish them to treat you. Confucius said, "Do not do to others what you would not like others to do unto you, and do unto others what you want others to do unto you." Benevolence means the practice of these two golden principles, which universally permeates all world ethical, cultural, and religious traditions throughout the ages. Regarding man-earth interaction, we are all ultimately linked to all life on Earth and therefore must treat our environment with respect and care. Furthermore, man's obsession with development and growth, and particularly still more things to give us greater convenience, pleasure, and comfort, contradicts all teachings against extreme greed and the principle calling for moderation. Whereas Western civilization often regards nature as an object for eventual conquest, the Chinese treat nature with great reverence and respect. Chinese are appreciative of nature as humans and earth, as part of nature, are deemed to be one entity. Such a world outlook brings up a civilization with a sense of tolerance in pursuit of coexistence and harmony. Concerning man-heaven interaction, Confucius honored heaven as a supreme source of goodness upon which every human being is personally dependent. The pinnacle achievement in life is to be one with heaven. It is because in Confucian teaching, the primary concern is humanity and the interrelationship between people. Confucianism has only a very general description and mention of heaven or God, leaving a large amount of room in the spiritual realm for Chinese people to learn from the other civilizations and religions, such as Buddhism from India, Islam from the Middle East, and Christianity from the West. And perhaps for that reason, Chinese culture and thus religion is a very tolerant one, being a culture and religion of infinite possibilities and capable of accommodating all and any supreme beings. And perhaps for that same reason, Chinese would seldom engage themselves in arguments about whose God is a true God and whose God isn't one, or whose is a better God. And Chinese, unlike other culture of monotheism, do not have the burden of being self-ordained missionaries defending one religion while attempting to convert everybody else to a particular one. Perhaps Chinese regards heaven or God as so supreme and magnificent that it is beyond description and definition by human. And unlimited possibilities and imagination exist with this heavenly state of mind. Instead, Chinese focuses on the interfacing layer between the spiritual sphere and the materialistic world, and which can be explained as a network of social and interpersonal relationships, relationship between man and his inner self, man and his surrounding environment, and man and his fellow men. Therefore, any type of belief or religion can easily blend into Chinese spiritual world, but for it to be practiced by the people in the local communities has to be filtered through the Confucian network of traditional and social relationship and be Sinicized or interpreted with Chinese characteristics. Therefore, when Buddhism or Islam or Christianity was introduced into China, they are customized and local interpretations and have to blend in with the house practices of Chinese society. So a combination of Chinese and Western culture and Chinese modernization will constitute a second Renaissance. Chinese traditional core values are established and time-tested while undergoing twists and turns throughout history. These values are modified and adapted in different timings and contexts, and yet are made applicable to solving the problems of time. In different eras and locations, the manifestations and the application could vary, but the underlying core values remain steadfast and sustained. According to Great Learning, if you can renovate yourself one day, do so from day to day, and let there be daily renovation. This statement signifies the unique innate quality of a life force of perpetuate renewing power of the Chinese cultural and gives momentum to self-improvement and self-regeneration as testified in the recent Chinese history. Ever since the mid-19th century, the Chinese people have been looking forward to a modernized China with the renaissance of the Chinese culture. We believe that the value of the East and the West are not incompatible. Instead, they constitute a set of values at the two ends of the spectrum, just like the yin and yang of Tai Chi. Western and Eastern emphases of core values are paired to define the latitude of interpretation. Individual, community, rights and obligations, freedom with responsibilities, achievements with sacrifices, competitions with alliances, diversity with harmony. The two sets of values operate with one another as two opposing principles in nature, complementing and supplementing one another, but one will be incomplete without the other. Our decision to lean towards one end over the other in any occasion is time-dependent, place-dependent, and people-dependent. Oftentimes, Chinese prefers the middle way, a position that offers the greatest flexibility and is called moderations. By combining the strength of the East and the West, we can make possible a multipolar world order for the modern century. Therefore, the renaissance of the Chinese culture is not simply a matter for China and the Chinese nation. New elements will be injected into global civilization, paving the way for a second renaissance for the entire human race. This second renaissance brings about a new dimension to define an awakened generation of humanity. The third knock, okay? So since the third knock by the West in 1972, China has undergone a miraculous transformation, blossoming from a poor agricultural economy into a major economic powerhouse. The 21st century will see us embarking on the third Silk Road. This is the third knocked on the doors on the West, offering dialogue and friendship. This is a visionary One Belt, One Road narrative proposed by President Xi Jinping. This initiative will help further the exchange of not only material goods, namely energy resources, transportation, and a variety of services, but also the exchange of ideas, knowledge, culture, and values through new communication lines and networks to promoting people-to-people interaction. The two previous Silk Roads trades tea, silk, spice, exotic fruits, jewelry, and gold. The 21st century Silk Road trades for, apart from creative ideas and innovations, it trades values. It offers peace. This modern Silk Road travels neither by land nor sea, nor go from one place to the other, but travels through the inner workings of human mind, driven by its desire to captivate the advantage of peaceful competition in this globalized world. In 2013, President Xi Jinping put forward his strategic vision, known shortly as the One Belt, One Road Initiative. It is a new model of connectivity among peoples. However, connectivity is not merely about building roads and bridges, high-speed railroads, oil and gas pipelines, electric power grids, fiber optics, or making linear connections of different places on service. More importantly, it should be a three-dimensional combination of infrastructure, institution, and people-to-people exchanges, and a five-way multifaceted progress in policy communication, infrastructure connectivity, trade link, capital flow, and understanding among peoples. And maybe even more. It should be so. Infrastructure consists of thoroughfares, which include roads, airspace, ship lanes, railroads, high-speed, electric grids, fiber optics, pipelines, water and waste. What are the characteristics of this One Belt, One Road initiative? Looking back in history, we can learn from the ancient Silk Road that there were three. Firstly, perhaps people is the most central element. Why is this new initiative for regional cooperation named as a Belt and Road instead of group and plan like the G7 and Marshall Plan? The answer is people. The new initiative is not just a government-to-government G2G platform, but people-to-people exchanges. True, the process is underpinned by government bodies, but the materialization of this grand vision revolves around people. And it was the many ordinary people across the continent that actually connected the East and the West by interactions, exchanges, and trade. diasporas in the neighboring countries could all be mobilized to forge steadfast bonding with the people of all countries. The second characteristic is goodwill. The second characteristic of this new model of connectivity must be goodwill, because this initiative is open to all countries and peoples interested in being connected for mutual development, regardless of their forms of government, cultural and religious backgrounds, and geographic locations. Common development was once the super glue which bonded the different countries along the ancient Silk Road together, and equal footage is what made this win-win situation possible. Christian, Muslim, Buddhist, black and white or yellow people were all benefited equally from trades and exchanges along the Silk Road. Western media often refer to the recent rise of China as threats. Indeed, in the last 500 years, the Chinese has recorded at least 4 periods of prosperities, 4 peaceful rises without colonies or threats. As I said before, Julius Caesar said, "I came, I saw, I conquered." The Chinese said, "I made friends and I went home." So the new initiative should not be construed as China's ambitions to become a regional hegemon, but China's reaching out, offering friendship and peace. More accurately, it is also about China's bringing in, motivated by goodwill. China is inviting people and countries along the Silk Road to build a community of shared interests and common destiny, a common community in which no one is left behind and no one has to take second place. We all have different pasts, but we also have a common future to face, a common destiny. So, the overall vision of the One Belt One Road initiative is expected to bring about shared economic, cultural, and social prosperity. But unlike other regional cooperation projects, which have a fixed policy agenda and set mechanism, the Belt and Road initiative is but a grand vision, providing ample and infinite room for creative solutions and possibilities. It is more ambitious and far-sighted, and at the same time, more flexible, accommodating, and adaptable to new conditions and challenges than the ancient Silk Roads. It provides an overarching theme and umbrella under which all sorts of cooperation can be made possible. Simply put, the One Belt One Road initiative is neither about seeking sphere of influence or striving for hegemony. It's about connecting countries and people, accommodating differences, embracing diversities, realizing potentials, and enabling various goals and prosperities. However, mutual understanding is the most difficult task in international cooperation. In fact, it might take hundreds of years for the West to understand what constitutes China and Chineseness. In recent past, starting in the 15th century, we have seen the 3 knocks, and with the second knock coming in, the first knock, the West has knocked on the ancient doors of China for at least 3 times. And the first knock, we have seen Matteo Ricci, Bouvet, Marco Polo, but the door was shut. The second knock came in 1840 when Britain invaded China and launched the First Opium War. The China stores were plied open for just a while. But the third knock came in the midst of the Cold War in 1972, and when Richard Nixon visited China. For more than 100 years after being brought to its knees at gunpoint by the West, China has awakened, realizing that it had to catch up with the Western world. When Deng Xiaoping came into power with rapid economic advancement, China moved towards a moderately well-off society. This modern Silk Road merges creative markets and aligned policies to form alliances in exploring the commonalities among cultures and community values. This Silk Road sees citizens of different cities and countries sharing common aspirations and inviting one another into their dreams. Their life is celebrated through cultural pursuits, and our people are enchanted by the arts, enlightened by the cultural differences, and enriched by social diversities. This Silk Road teaches people with mutual respect that despite our different backgrounds and upbringings, there are some fundamental values we all hold dear, some basic principles we all respect, and certain core values we all embrace. The purpose of this Silk Road is not to establish an empire of might, but to extend our empire of minds. A very famous Chinese, Sun Yat-sen, once had this dream. He said, "Once our goal of modernizing China is accomplished, the dawn of a new century will shine upon our beautiful country, and the whole of humanity will enjoy a more brilliant future." And last year was the 150th anniversary of Sun Yat-sen's birthday. So we here quote him. And Sun Yat-sen drew his three people's principles from Abe Lincoln's Gettysburg Address, and also drawing from Henry George's philosophy of land social. Okay, let me take 1 minute to tell you about Sun Yat-sen. I have to do that. Can I do that? Sun Yat-sen has this three people's principles, which are enshrined to the throne. Okay, and the purpose of doing that is to establish a China which is free, which is prosperous, which is powerful. They say that China has to subscribe to a government of a country of the people, by the people, and for the people. Of the people means nationalism, by the people means democracy, for the people means improving people's livelihood. And whether he got those ideas, got it from Gettysburg Address and Henry George's Progress and Poverty. I hope you all know who Henry George is, right? No? It's a very famous New Yorkers. His funeral was the most important event in New York in the first half of the last century. Sun Yat-sen got his ideas of national democracy early on, before he overthrew the Qing dynasty, when he formed the Tongmenghui and was first published in Mingbao at the editorial. But it was not in 1906 that he formulated this three people's principle and really put it in print. Now, first of all, is nationalism is of the people, meaning that it's cultural identity. What makes Chinese Chinese? Okay, so China nationalism versus ethnic nationalism, and it's a way of uniting all the 56 ethnicities of China, not only the Hans, which is the majority of the tribe, but also others as well. So using a nationalism to combine China for forming and formulating a China nationality, and he was the first one who did that. And even the first flag of the Republic has 5 colors signifying the 5 major races or ethnicities in China. The second one is by the people of the people. By the people is democracy, is meaning people's power. People power, he separated those into the power of politics and the power of governance. The power of politics is voting, okay? Is a national assembly. Then the power of people, meaning to be able to express the political wish and political choice. There are 4 powers. It can be certified by people: election, recall, impeachment. The initiative of new processes and new legislations, and referendum means reaffirmations of people's choice. And whereas the governance is really a combination of the Western 3 branches government together with the Chinese traditional administrative traditions. Okay, very good. Traditions of education, examinations as well. And lastly is the people's welfare. Is for the people, for the people. For people in ancient Chinese, a good government has to be righteous, be able to create wealth, to improve livelihood, therefore producing a harmonious society. And a lot of government forgotten about the two, okay? Creating wealth for the people and improving livelihood of the people. And I wouldn't go into the details of that. But I also have a dream, okay? Somebody less known as Sun Yat-sen, but I have a dream. I have a dream of a cultural China with ideas and values to inspire humanity. The redefinition of the Chinese core value signifies the awakening of a modern humanity, and will eventually lead to another human renaissance of a modern time. And as what President Xi Jinping and President Obama at the Edinburgh retreat, they exchanged views that the Chinese dream is interlinked with the American dream, which is inclusive of the beautiful dream of the people from countries around the world. And what's that dream? And this Chinese dream is not only the dream of 1.3 billion Chinese over 5,000 years, it's also a world dream. It is a dream of peace under heaven and the world as one. And this dream belongs to all of us, belongs to you, and belongs to me as well. So, thank you.
Okay, I just want to check something. Is Helga still with us?
Yes.
Still there? Can you bring her up on the screen, please? Okay, while we're doing that, let me say a couple things here. We've got about 45 minutes that we're going to take for our questions. If Helga's there, however, I want to see if she wants to respond to what she's heard. And then from there, we'll then begin our questions. Okay, we have Helga back up on the screen.
But this is a, I have a, okay, the echo. Okay, no, this is a very exciting perspective, but I would actually like to propose, Patrick, that we organize a big event, maybe an international conference, because I think that the knowledge about Chinese culture, but also about Western culture, is really not known to the other side sufficiently. And for example, I was in China one time and I was looking for scholars on Nicolaus of Cus, who is one of the most important scholar and great mind of the 15th century in Europe. And I only found one professor who was familiar with Nicolaus of Cus. And I think this is typical, because what you said about the difference between Western values and Chinese values, I think that because of the British influence, you know, in the universities all over the world, but also I think in China for some time, many times people mistake humanism with liberalism, and that is really not true. We are not talking about the Aristotelian tradition. We are not talking about certain traditions in Europe which then led to certain forms of the Enlightenment, the French Enlightenment, the English Enlightenment, which, as you correctly said, is centered very much on the role of the individual and liberalism and so forth. But that is exactly the tradition which was rejected by, you know, what we regard as the positive tradition of the pre-Socratic, the you know, Plato, Augustinus, Cusanus, Kepler, Leibniz, Schiller. I mean, that, and in science goes to, you know, Riemann, the Einstein, and similar thinkers. So there is a much huger fight in the tradition of Europe, European civilization, than most people really know. And it was the entire progress of science, of culture, of classical culture, comes in the rejection of this liberalist tradition. the oligarchy has employed a conscious warfare trying to get people off the idea of human creativity. And for example, I compared, as well as did some other members of the Schiller Institute, we compared the ideas of Confucius and Mencius with certain ideas and philosophers of the West. And there is a much greater unity. For example, this Nikolaus of Kos, whom I mentioned, he has conceptions which absolutely correspond to the Li and the concept of Ren in Confucius. For example, he has this idea of the if Li is the right place to do the right thing in the right place, Nikolaus of Cusa has this idea that each microcosm, each human being, can only fully develop if you contribute to the harmony of the macrocosm by developing all the other microcosms and vice versa. And that is exactly the win-win cooperation among human beings. This is the idea which went into the Peace of Westphalia of peace is only possible if you respect the interest of the other. And Leibniz, Leibniz was so responsive to Chinese philosophy because he himself was a continuation of this Nikolaus of Kos, and he had this idea, that each human being is a monad. Each human being contains in his own creative mind the entirety of the universe, and concordance is only possible if there is a harmonious development of all of these faculties. And this is what led into the Declaration of Independence and the idea of the pursuit of happiness, which is not happiness from the standpoint of luck, but it is exactly the fulfillment, the development of all potentialities which are embedded in the human being. So this tradition in European philosophy, which we call humanism, is totally opposed to liberalism, and it is much, much more in cohesion with Confucianism than it's generally recognized. The problem with Western books and Western university teaching is that it has been occupied for a very long time by the people who won the wars, by the oligarchy, by the people who try to suppress this creativity in the population. And I think we would do the second Renaissance a very big favor if we would organize a symposium working out these parallels much, much more. And I think that this is actually crucial for the understanding of the people from the different cultures. Nikolaus of Kos said the only reason why people from different cultures can understand each other is because they each produce scientists and artists who develop universal principles. And once you have an understanding of these universal principles, you can communicate. This is why musicians of different nations can be in one orchestra. This is why scientists come to the same conclusions about scientific discovery, exactly as you developed in terms of the binary system. And I think that there are much more treasures to be found, both for the West and learn from China, as well as the Chinese people understanding not the liberal teaching of history and the philosophy of ideas, but really going to the original sources as they were and as they were the drivers of progress in the West. So I'm very excited, and I hope we can organize something along these lines.
Okay, let's go right to questions. Microphone is here in the center, just so people know. And please, state who you are and try to be brief. We will try to extend the period of questions as much as we can, but we're looking at approximately 30 to 40 minutes right now. Go ahead.
Yeah, good afternoon. I have a concern, not a question, but it's a profound concern that we are aware of this problem, but we are not doing anything about it. The Silk Road is a long road and it needs a long planning, and we have long-term problem associated with this road. Are we doing anything related to the Muslim world, extremism in the Muslim world related to this road? Are we preparing a road for the extremists to come and use that road? Number one. Number two, look the steps of China. They go, they make friends, and they go back. And what we are doing here is this, that we are putting a negative picture of United States, very negative. By how? Like my personal view is this, that Donald Trump made the right decision, but he's taking wrong steps and media is after him. And this is sending a very bad signal message around the world in 56 Islamic nation that we hate you, and we are constantly in fight, bullying with them, which is wrong, absolutely wrong. Like, for example, saying people from Syria, Muslim, they should not come, Christian should come to United States. That's a wrong way of saying. That's a wrong way of doing, because that is sending a bad signal, bad pictures around the world. So we are not planning yet, or do we have any plan how we will combat if something negative happen on this road, which is China is coming with a great enthusiasm, with great alacrity, fine, but we will be sharing that road. We are also a superpower. What will be our command on the road? Are we going to be just submissive to China and China will lead all the time, or we will be standing there with dignity? Thank you very much.
Helga, you want to go, or you want Patrick? Which?
Well, I think Patrick will for sure say something, but let me just say from my experience, I think this worry about being submissive to China is not confirmed. I mean, take, for example, Africa. I have talked to many African leaders, people of all walks of life, and they all say, that what China is doing, sure, China is pursuing its own interest in Africa, but it is also providing for the interest of the different African nations. So don't be afraid. I think, I have studied this matter for a better part of my life, over 40 years. And I have truly come to the conclusion that China does mean it when they say win-win. Concerning the Muslim world, I think the only way to come to peace and end terrorism is the extension of the Silk Road into the entire Middle East, or Southwest Asia. Because look at this region, we heard before the Russian gentleman talking about desert. All of this region is a desert. The desert goes from the Atlantic coast of Africa all the way to the Arabian Peninsula, to Iran, into China. This is a huge strip of desert which is growing. Now, if you want to create a livelihood for the people living in the Middle East or in Southwest Asia, you have to develop water, you have to develop nuclear power, you have to have large-scale desalination, you have to access the aquifer, you have to redirect rivers, you have to tap into the moisture of the atmosphere, you have to have a complete change, turning these deserts into beautiful gardens. Now, that cannot be done if you only do it by one country or the Muslim world alone. It only will function if all the big neighbors, Russia, China, India, Iran, Egypt, hopefully Germany, hopefully France, Italy, and the United States, they all must give hands to each other and say, we have a commitment to rebuild Iraq, to rebuild Syria, to rebuild Yemen. Yemen right now is one of the big victims of this whole policy. There is a terrible genocide going on in Yemen, which should stop. And I think that, that is why I'm saying that if we can convince Mr. Trump, President Trump, accept the Chinese offer to build the infrastructure in the United States together with China, but also to develop Southwest Asia and Africa, have a joint mission along the lines that every country should be a king. Every country should have its fulfillment and harmony. I think then we can do it. And I think that that is the only way how we can end terrorism, because, sure, you have to end this militarily against ISIS, but then how do you dry out the environment for recruitment of the jihad? You have to give young people an incentive to become a scientist, a teacher, to study and have a family and a future. And that can be only done if there is a promise by the leaders of the world that that is exactly what they will do. And then it will be not long-term, because, I'm very impressed about the speed with which China is developing all these projects. In Germany, the Berlin airport is being built since 100 years, and it is being postponed every year, and it will take another year and another year. The Chinese go in and they build it in no time. The line between Pudong and Shanghai was built in 22 months over swamps. So I'm very optimistic that all of this can change the world within a year or two, not solve all problems, but people will have hope that there is a future, if we can convince Trump to go along. And I want you to help in that as much as you can.
Well, I think one of the most notable misinterpretation of this Silk Road is that it is a project. It's not a project. It's a vision. It's a proposal. The difference between a project and a vision is like a star. It can never be reached. But like the mariners of the sea, we chart our course by them. We go towards the North Stars. We go according to the stars. Not in the process of reaching the stars, but going in their direction. Vision is a direction. Vision is a possibilities. Visions are options. It's not a project. Projects have roadmaps, have timelines, has built in parts, had plannings. This is not a project. It is just a proposal put up by the Chinese. It's not put up by Xi Jinping. He was the one who announced it, who put together. It was a combination, accumulation of 5,000 years of Chinese wisdom, and the wisdom of all our Chinese friends as well. Building a Silk Road is like building a Great Wall. How many years did it take to build a Great Wall? It's not built overnight. It's not built over 10 years. It's not built over a person's lifetime. It was built over 500 years, 600 years. You know how Great Wall has been built? Okay. About 2,500 years ago, when China was in a warring state, there are about 6 different warring states occupying China. Each of them had to face the Mongols from the west. So all these warring states have to fight among themselves, and also to ward out the Mongols. Okay, the Mongols on the back, and the friendly enemies in the front. So they have to build walls to ward out the Mongols so they can fight the Chinese. Okay, that's what the Chinese do. They fight among themselves. Okay, so with time, one fraction overcome the other fraction, and there will be a remodeling of sharing of the territories. And when there's sharing, when there's a reshuffling of the territories, when one province ate over the other province and they're the bigger territories, and then they look at the walls, they have built a piece of wall there, a piece of wall there. Hey, why don't we link the two walls together? So we link the two walls together, and that's a redundant wall that's broken down. Okay, so that went on for another maybe dynasty or so, and they fought among themselves again, and then there's a reshuffling of all the powers, and they look at their walls, and they are not happy with the walls that the previous dynasty built. They modify the walls again. So they build. So after 500 years, there finally came a Qing dynasty who unified all these warlords, and look at all the walls that were built by the previous warlords and say, this useless, let's break them down. This redundant, there's a gap here, let's bring them up. So all of a sudden, the wall was built, linked up. It was not built overnight over the intuitions or the conception of one person or a few persons. So in other words, Xi Jinping would not come out and say, I want to build a Silk Road from here to there and with so many stops and with so many different miles, and let's do that. He never said that. Okay. He said, this is our vision from here to there, from here to there. This is our vision. China has all the facilities. We will contribute to a Asia Infrastructure Development Bank, and we have all these developmental excess capacities that we can use. If you want to build something, we talk together. Okay, and China never imposed building something as other people's territory because China wants it. Never without an invitation from the host country. So if there's a country you need something that was built, you talk to China. China, work out a plan, work out a financial scheme, work out a plan that we can build it, and then something built. And then maybe through generations afterwards, these can all be linked together. And you can do that even without going through China. Kazakhstan had built a speed rail from somewhere to somewhere, but it was financed by Spain. They call it Spanish Railroad in Kazakhstan. And it's part of the thing that goes from China to London. It's part of the link. It's not built by Chinese, it's built by Spanish money in Kazakhstan. So you can do whatever you want with it. If you want China's help, talk to China. China will help you out. Okay, we'll work out a deal that's specific for your country, specific for your needs, specific for the projects. And nobody has ever to bow to anybody, not even to China. That's the beauty of this scheme. Is nobody has to take second place.
Okay, next. Yes, sir.
Hey everybody, my name is thank you. My name is Tristan Zhang. I'm partner at Helix Capital. We're a global private and institutional investment group. My question is, I think, fairly relevant to today's discussions because we live in, well, the new administration specifically is moving very quickly in terms of a lot of decisions, right? And Donald Trump has announced that he's planning to pull out of the Paris Climate Accord agreements. So in relevance to today's energy discussions, which unfortunately we didn't get too deeply involved with, this is actually one of the last, I would say, similar agreements where China and the US can actually collaborate on, right? So I was actually, a little bit disappointed by the announcement. So for Dr. Ho, this question, how do you foresee that these two countries can actually collaborate, on significant endeavors, right, in the coming 4 years? I mean, when you're pulling out of something so significant, and what is your suggestive stance? Thank you.
Hey, very good. That's $1 million questions. In Obama's administration, Obama and Xi Jinping seems to strike a very good accord over the climate change, and is the platform that China and the United States really work hand in hand together very well. Okay, they got together very well. But now that with our new presidents there, and he just threw this climate change obligations out of the window, but I don't think he would do anything very, very drastically by rescinding the United Nations, the FCCC, the framework of, it's a long word, of framework constitution for climate change. Okay, that's binding, but I think he will have a lot of repercussion if he really wants to put out of that. But that being said, I think he could do a lot of things to bypass and to circumvent and all the requirements of climate change. And that being said, I think what he really wanted to do is is not that much that he is against climate change, but the regulatory limitation of climate change on economic development, especially on energy development, that he was most against. Okay, so as long as he could get those regulation deregulated, to liberate the vigor of the energy industries in America, I think he will be happy with that, without really going against the strain and going against the grain of climate change. And but back to your question, and what platform can China and the United States can work together? I think there are many. I think we're striking at one is to build infrastructure around the world. I think it's time that we concentrate on building infrastructure. The United States itself needs a lot of renovative work of old infrastructures and also build new infrastructure. When was the last time the United States has ever built any infrastructure? When was the last time? It was 80 years ago. It was in Eisenhower time. It was the interstate. That was the last time. But even the interstate is all worn down and with potholes and also what have you. Okay, and it's all out of date now. And since that time, the United States had not invested anything on infrastructure. Sorry to say. So it's time to go back to investing in physical assets and coming down to physical economy rather than living out of debts, credit, and virtual economy. I think that's what infrastructure and the Belt and Road Initiative is really calling out for. It's a new model of economic growth. Because the world has shifted so much towards a virtual economy, shifted too much over credit spending. Okay, and it's time to go back to the basic of physical economy, of physical assets.
I speak for everyone here when I think that hopefully everything will work out over here. Thank you.
Infrastructure is one, space exploration is another one that China and
It's much easier said than done, but yes, hopefully everything will work out. Thank you.
Well, I know of at least two people that may have an answer to that. Helga, do you want to say anything about this now, or you?
Yeah, just very briefly. I mean, this whole climate change question is a very complicated question. And, the good thing about the space program is that it teaches people again that the human species is not living in an earthbound system. I think that the perspective of space exploration, especially with the lunar missions of China going to the far side of the moon next year, will open up totally new perspectives also on the real sources of climate change, because the view of the galaxy, the view of the solar system, I think that we are on the verge of getting totally new insights of our entire physical universe. And I think that we have not reached the final question on the origins of climate change, but that there is a big room for improvement of our knowledge coming from space exploration. I want to leave it at that.
Okay, so Jason, why don't you go, and then I have someone in the audience we may ask to comment on these matters. Go ahead.
All right, well, it's tough to figure out what to ask. There's so many topics that came up. I was thinking about bringing up the Chinese Investment Corporation's proposal to reinvest some of its treasury holdings into U.S. infrastructure as another means of collaboration between the two countries. But since you brought up Leibniz, I really wanted to ask you a question about the basis for collaboration between countries. You brought up Leibniz and the Yijing. Leibniz was, at that time, the top scientist in Europe. He was involved in trying to unify the churches. He had developed the calculus. He was a scientist. He was an economist. And in that controversy with China, Leibniz said that being very doctrinaire about the rights of Confucianism or the rights of Christianity should not be an excuse to stop the collaboration, and that the West had much to learn from China. In particular, he said that the natural theology of the Chinese, that is a sense of the heavens and our relationship to it that accords with reason, he said was more developed in China than in the West. Although he said that the West had Christianity, which was truth via revelation. So he contrasted those two, and he said that truth should always be reasonable. So what I wanted to ask you about was, the basis for legitimacy of a government is in promoting the welfare of people. Leibniz also on the emperor, the Kangxi emperor, he said, yes, he's a very powerful emperor, but most importantly, he is a good person, and therefore he has the right to rule, and he's doing something useful. So what I wanted to ask you was if you could say more about other bases for unification or collaboration between people in order to create a renaissance. You had just mentioned the space program very recently. China's work on the EAST, the East Tokamak, is leading in the world. What are some other bases to move humankind as a whole forward in ways that we've never been before that you can see collaborating on?
I would say 4 things. Okay, first of all is sustainability. The world is sustained by 3 things. Sustained by 3 things. Number 1 is food. Second one is energy. The third one is drinkable water. Okay, right now we all know about what food can do to poverty and undernourishment. And now we are now into realizing the importance of energy. So we're fighting for energy right now. Okay, last century we're fighting for food. The colonization, the British imperialism, the 2 world wars, all for food. It's all about food. Fighting for salt and tea and opium, whatever. It's just for food. And now we're fighting for what? In the Middle East, we're fighting for oil, gas, nuclear, whatever, for energy. And mark my words, by the end of this century, we'll be fighting for water, drinkable water. Okay, but we can work on the 3 things, making them sustainable for human development, human progress. But what is the future for human mentalities? Is AI, artificial intelligence. Okay, it's something that we can work together.
Let me do the following. I want to here interpolate one person for my own, because otherwise I'm going to explode. Tom, I think you might want to say something here just on this question of climate change. Could you do that? Just so we have that on the record. I saw your hand sort of up before.
Yeah, excuse me. I'm Tom Weissmuller, and I do lecture all over the world on climate. One of the suppositions that I heard the questioner make was that Donald Trump might be doing the wrong thing in getting out of the Paris Agreement. I happen to think he's doing the right thing. And the reason I think it's the right thing is that some of the dangers that the Paris Agreement tries to prevent are non-existent. And the one I'm talking about is the one that most of the people in this room were exposed to about a month or so ago, and that is that there is a relationship between CO2 and sea level rise, because sea level rise is the great danger that the Paris Accord is trying to prevent. And I think with hard, verified, validated data that I showed in my slides, you see that there is really no connection between sea level rise, which is happening, and the sea level rise you see happening is decidedly linear all over the world. It is a slight rise in places that are tectonically inert, where the earth doesn't move up or down near where they are. But it is still linear. Over the last 150 years, we have CO2 accelerating at a massive rate. Since 1880, 38% increase, which is a very rapid acceleration. The Paris, by the way, and no signal visible whatsoever in the linear rate of sea level rise. If the best the Paris Agreement can hope to do is reduce CO2 by 1%, maybe even 2%, that we don't have an instrument that can measure the effect of that in sea level rise when we can't even see it, what a 38% in CO2 can do to sea level rise. Now, people complain that, well, the oceans are a big buffer and they won't rise that rapidly. Well, therein is the solution. Since the oceans aren't rising that rapidly, you don't need to spend billions of dollars fighting climate change, when instead you could put high-speed rail in the United States. You could patch up the highways. You could create a grid in Africa that can pull millions of people out of poverty. That's where the money should be spent. And the $1 billion of American taxpayer money that the President Obama, in his last days in office, sent out of the country to places in Africa where the intent is not to allow them to put in electricity, coal-fired power plants, thorium nuclear, or any other way to basically create sufficient energy, which was one of the number 2 item in Dr. Ho's talk of what's important. That is crippling the world. We need to look at that Paris Agreement, say international cooperation is great, but let's put that money to where it really can help humanity. That's it.
First of all, Dr. Ho, thank you very much for a very comprehensive discussion today. And again, I was going to ask one thing, but then I thought of asking something different as well. First, I thought it was very ironic that in your presentation you had demonstrated, and something I think we know, that China has not been involved in conquest. China has not forced any of its policies, inventions, principles throughout the course of known history on other nations. And yet it seems that China has had possibly the greatest impact on the greatest amount of nations on the globe. So I think that, says something about maybe the counterintuitive nature of power, and also the idea of the human mind, that people will seek naturally. The human mind seeks for things of a higher power, and therefore people, if you have to impose something on someone by force, it demonstrates that exactly the principle that that's not something of a higher power, and therefore not optimally useful. But on just the topic of a few things that were mentioned, it seemed that there was an underlying theme of the issue of scarcity, the issue of, as you just mentioned, drinking water maybe at a premium, by within, the preceding decades. And I just wanted to mention one thing that, we're fortunate enough to learn through this organization as well, things that are, intimately scientifically going on in China. The Chinese space program, for example, which within the next decade is planning to go, well, very soon, going to the dark side of the moon, looking to mine helium-3, which will be used to power fusion generators. And I think the idea is that looking at these sources of energy production that have an ever increasing higher energy throughput, and if we continually in our human minds, if there's no scarcity in our human minds and we continue to develop ever higher forms of energy throughput in our production, then we won't have to worry about scarce resources. And maybe that's the greatest benefit of all for the future in terms of the One Belt, One Road project. So I'm wondering if you would please comment on that. Thank you.
I think you rightfully pointed out the fact of what China really wants. Because in Chinese, we have one saying, being a big country is easy. A big country, you just have to have a big GDP, then there's a big country. A lot of people, wealthy, happy, that's big country is easy. But being a strong country is more difficult. Okay, strong country requires, ways and means to protect itself and to generate a sense of security for its people. But that's not the end. For China, for many countries, being a strong country is good enough. For China, it's not. When you look at Chinese history, China has been a strong country all along, but it's not satisfied as being a strong country. China wants to be a great country. What makes a country great is soft power, is attractiveness, is the things that it does and it represents that commands respect without instilling fear. And that's soft power. And that's what China wants. China never tried to be a hegemon. It does not want to conquer people. But they want to be great. They want to command respect by helping people, by sharing what they have. And that's what we strive to become a great country. That's what Xi Jinping wants. Okay.
Thank you.
Before we go to the next question, let me just announce what we're doing. We're going to just take the next 3 questions, which are in line there. That'll pretty much conclude us. We'll be at 2:15, so we're extending it by 15 minutes. I know some people were interested in the lecture. If you leave by 2:15, you'll still be able to get there by 3 for those who are concerned about that. Just wanted to make that announcement. So we'll take the next 3 questioners, and then we'll conclude at that point. Okay, go ahead.
Good afternoon, Helga and Dr. Ho. This is going to be very short. Thank you. Dr. Ho, your presentation on Chinese history was excellent. And I've been around many birthdays. My teaching of China was about fireworks, dragons, kung fu, fortune cookies, and so on. I just realized what my mission is today: to rediscover China by the way of passing it on through education, because the average person has no clue what is going on. And I mean, this is 2017. And back when I was in grade school, this is all I remember of China. And, the last time you were here, I learned more in the whole time that I was, Patrick. So what's on my plate right now is to get people the right direction and tell them, the countries are in a unified development of infrastructure. And you have to open your minds. You have to forget about the past, because it is the past. Now we have a new world paradigm, and it's all about freedom and the right to live. And with that, I end.
Thank you. I totally agree with you, and you're very passionate about what you talked about, and I'm impressed. I'm touched. Thank you very much.
Thank you.
My name is Phil Rubenstein. Maybe this question is a little bit for both, but I think from the standpoint that I've gotten from working with Lyndon LaRouche is that ultimately sustainability comes through the creative powers of the human mind and the ability to communicate that to other people. That what we really are constantly in need of is great scientific discovery at the most fundamental level, great cultural, artistic development coming from a sort of communication amongst cultures. Now, one of the problems we have in the United States and in the West is environmentalism. That indeed there's a clampdown on real scientific development. I'm not completely sure this is understood from the Eastern standpoint. For example, Germany, which was one of the great scientific nations, has a completely anti-nuclear policy. They're shutting down their nuclear plants, but it's really an anti-science policy. In the United States, similarly, we're shutting down nuclear plants, living standards. I mean, we actually have a higher death rate than we did before, which is almost unheard of. In China, for example, when they had the Three Gorges Project, many environmentalists in the West were opposed to this. They thought this was another example of Western influence in terms of development and growth. And in fact, at that time viewed China as a problem because it was so big. How are you going to feed all these people at the right level? And always this Malthusian outlook has been proven wrong. That is, we do figure out how to grow more food if we have that kind of scientific development. So I'd like to ask the question, first of all, I mean, it's also worth noting that the people who brought, as Helga mentioned, the British, the people who brought in an anti-science outlook, Bertrand Russell, was very much in favor of the backwardness of China when he was there in the 1910s and 20s. So I'd like to know what the view is of this environmentalist, what I would call at least anti-science aspect of the West, what the view of that is from the standpoint of the Chinese and your own standpoint, and what this may or may not do for the ability to work together. You know, there's been a lot of talk about how Beijing, of course, has a pollution problem, but I think the Chinese perspective is to defeat it with scientific development in the main, not to, you know, and that I don't know if it's so clear how anti-science and anti-cultural development the West has become, and that's really what makes it look as sort of as bad as it did. But prior to that, we had people like Lincoln, we had people like Leibniz, we had people like Nicholas of Cusa. We don't have that kind of thinking outside of Lin in the West at this point. And I'd like to ask you how that appears to you or other Chinese, and I think I'll leave it at that.
Okay, well, I don't know how to comment on that, but I can tell you how the Chinese think about it. I never thought about anti-science or anti-this or anti-that. And the Chinese are very pragmatic people. And I think the Chinese has always been swarmed by problems of survival. Okay? People have to live, and people have to eat, and people have to survive. And you know, without surviving for this generations, there is not going to be the next generation if this generation is going to survive. So we are very pragmatic people. We would not, of course, we would, after we have solved our present problems, and we have to anticipate tomorrow's problem, but today's problems rank first. We have to live through to today, you know, to face the problem that we have tomorrow. It's a very roundabout way of answering your questions, but I think it would do.
Yes, grace and
Hold
peace.
on. Helga, you have some.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Oh, yeah, I just want to say that the green plague in Germany is really unbelievable. You know, it's not just the Green Party, it's all the parties except the party I'm leading, which are green. And the Greens are anti-Russia, the Greens are anti-China, the Greens are anti-Trump, the Greens are anti-science. It's a real, you know, foot soldiers of the British Empire. I mean, we have published a lot about it, and I would like you to look at it. Otherwise, I just want to say that if you look at only the last 10,000 years of human history, I mean, just think about the enormous progress mankind has made from, let's say, the Stone Age to today. And Mr. LaRouche has developed a very important principle, which is the relation of the energy flux density used in the production process and the connection to the relative potential population density, which can be maintained with that level of energy flux density. If we go only to alternative energies, you have to reduce the population to 1 billion, and that's what the Greens are proposing. So, since Dennis mentioned the class, which will start next week, I want to reiterate, the Lyndon LaRouche's physical economic theory really addresses this in a very profound way. And just think, where should we be in 10,000 years from now? I think that we can be absolutely optimistic that human creativity will open up questions which we don't even now know how to ask. And I'm totally convinced that human creativity will, define us to be a completely more developed species in 10,000 years that we cannot even imagine now. And that vision should guide us and drive forward profound discoveries in science and the arts.
Okay, good.
Thank you. Grace and peace, everyone. My name is Juwan Bay. I'm with the Nation of the Ancient One, Public Interest Resource Club. I think I would be remiss. First of all, I'd like to thank Mr. Ho and the Russian gentleman, I forget his name, for their gracious humanitarianistic views and offerings. It's very, very ambitious, and I'm glad I came down from Connecticut. I'm glad I came to hear this. But I would be remiss not to point out some certain things just in context with what Mr. Ho brought up about the history of China, and how they came together as a people to be where they are now, to offer this gracious humanitarian offering as a people and a humanity. But here in America, as it stands right now, there's a serious divide. It's polarized, maybe even more than polarized. You have the elites and the rich, and you have the poor, and it's getting wider and wider. So there's no cohesive unity here for which this offering you have would be dispensed fairly as it stands right now, where it would benefit the entire population of this country. So the reason why I'm saying I would be remiss is because you have, let's just say, for example, the Native Americans at Standing Rock, who are recognized, those nations that are recognized as a separate sovereign nation, of their rights and their privileges and their basically their land is being infringed upon for corporate, benefits. So you have a lot of things that would interfere with the implementation of this gracious offering that your country and the Russian guys are offering. So my question is, I noticed in your presentation you had made reference to a people-to-people type of offering, the way this would be done. So my question is, what would be the nature of that, the methodology of that, and the application of that for your win-win proposal in relation to and how that's going to be in relation to the political nature of what's going on with the division in this country and how people are not being included in what you have to offer, just say for argument's sake, and I'm speaking hypothetically, this does come to fruition. There's going to be a bunch of people that's not going to benefit, because there'll be those in a position to gain the most from it and then preclude anyone who's not, who hasn't had the political clout or will to get a part of that. So my question would be, in the event that you're able to implement this or bring this proposal to fruition, what would be the methodology, the nature and application of that in light of the fact that this country is still suffering from its divisiveness, where people would possibly be left out?
Okay.
Well, the Belt and Road Initiative is not designed to solve individual countries' domestic problem, but it could be used that way. The people-to-people type of exchange that we were talking about is really is the meat and bone of this Silk Road, to this modern Silk Road, this Belt and Road Initiative. The skeletons was laid down initially in the formative stages with infrastructures building. Infrastructure as skeleton. Infrastructures as usually state-led, led by big enterprises, and usually, discussed and negotiated between states and with big enterprises coming in. But after after those were done, there are only a limitation of how much of these infrastructure that one can build. Okay, maybe this generation and next generation, the infrastructures will be built. Then what follow next? What follow is the people-to-people interactions and people-to-people gelling together, and they form the muscles and the flesh of this Silk Road Initiative. Now, what that was talking about is trade, commerce. We're not talking about big-time enterprises. The Silk Road, of course, in the beginning, will be involving the Fortune 500 with state-owned enterprises, because they need to bulldoze, to big projects. But after that, the Fortune 500 has done. There's the Fortune 5,000, the Fortune 50,000, the Fortune 5 million. And there are these small enterprises that the garage back shop operations back in Oklahoma. They look at the television and say, what big markets the Chinese market is offering, how can we get there? How can we sell our products to China? Well, it's through this bridge, the Belt and Road Initiative. We can do that. We can have a platform to get the small and medium price and also the individual enterprises to get together. And they will formulate the links between nations and among peoples. We're talking about having think tanks to work together. We're talking about having religious groups to work together, the cultural groups that work together, youth group that works together, women's group that work together. And these are the basis of people-to-people interaction, and they're really, will be facilitated when we have the infrastructures that connect these countries together. Now, that's the vision. That's our hope. That's the best we can do.
Well, I'm glad you qualified that, because that was one of the things that I was thinking of, whether it would be done through religious groups or private little companies that may not have multinational kinds of resources, that they would be able to engage with your proposal from a limited standpoint without the capital, from Wall Street to say, hey, China, I want you to build a factory for me so that I can expand.
Excuse me.
Or perhaps even an NGO type of thing would be amenable to that?
Could you, let me just say this, because Helga may have an answer to this.
Oh, I'm sorry.
Yeah. And if not, I certainly do. Go ahead. Helga, do you have something to say?
Well, I think that in the beginning, people always think that there is somebody being left out, but the experience of the 3 years of the new Silk Road, in the beginning, people in Central Asia thought that they are left out because the railway is being built from east to west, and others wanted it to be built from north to south. In the meantime, the integration of the new Silk Road Belt and Road Initiative and the Eurasian Economic Union of Russia is progressing, and these countries realize that through this international integration, everybody is benefiting because you are reaching a completely different economic platform, where every rule is being redesigned. And so I'm very optimistic that all of these problems really can be solved in a much shorter time than people think, because this is an end of an era. This is not just an economic program. We are talking about a new paradigm, which completely introduces new principles about what humanity is. And I think that is something people have to, because most people have not really thought about it. What do they want the world to be like in 100 years? And that is exactly the vision we have to talk about.
Yeah, good. I want to say, thank you. Did I interrupt you, Helga, or were you finished? You were finished. Okay. Because we're at our conclusion of our event, and I just want to take the opportunity to, of course, thank the speakers, and we'll say something about that in a minute, but just in response to what you said, the legacy of Barack Obama has destroyed the capacity of the American people often to express naturally the optimism which was characteristic of the United States. Now, there is no way for China or for India or for Russia or for any other country to deal with a problem which Americans have brought upon themselves. Long time ago, when I first met Lyndon LaRouche, this must be 1971, one of the things that he said, which I watched provoke people in the audiences that he would speak to. Back then, there were a lot of Black power and Black nationalists and other groups that existed, and I was associated with these groups. And one of the things that he used to say is that if you really want to understand how to overturn slavery, you must attack the slave. And I remember the first time I heard this, and I remember being simultaneously deeply shocked, deeply offended, and deeply relieved. All three things at once. The issue of our time and the issue of the cultural vision that you heard, and that in particular Helga has stood for in her founding of the Schiller Institute, is also called to mind for me because it was once a conversation I had with her. It was in 1992, and it was in November. And it was in Wiesbaden, actually it was in Ingelheim, I think. We may have been there. And what happened was the issue of the African-American spiritual came up. And she said, what do you think about these songs? You know, I've heard that these are supposed to be slave songs, but I don't hear any slavery in these songs. And I said a few things back, and I was sort of, well, no, I don't like them. We talked about it. And this was another time in which I took great umbrage and then began to think about it. And we had another individual present, Reverend James Bevel at the time. He was explaining something about these songs. But the reason I bring it up to you is there is no slavery in the African-American spiritual. But there is a sense of slavery in what's called hip hop. Oh, yes. And so the issue here is for us to actually move the United States away from where it is, the task of our movement and of the Schiller Institute in specific is to liberate people from the self-imposed chains that prevent them from understanding that they are the saviors, their own saviors. I'm not speaking here religiously, but as was said in the play William Tell, yes, we can seize our power, snatch our inalienable rights from the heavens, and God will help us with our right arm, so to speak. So we have a proposal. It's very clear. It's all written out. As Patrick said, it is a vision. Both of these, of course, are available in the back, or you can find out about them. But let us be very clear, as JFK said at the end of his inaugural address, God's work on earth must truly be our own. And I think that's exactly where we see this dialogue so powerfully. And so I just wanted to say that and thank Helga in particular in the most profound way for what she actually has done, not just today, but in the shaping of the entire approach, the vision that the Schiller Institute had in 1984 and has in the way in which we have described it here today. I want to thank everybody for coming today. And again, you can see us for the class and for all the other information. But I think we should go out from here and work on behalf of this vision. We invite you to do that. Stay in touch with us, and we'll be calling on you very soon. Thank you.